The red warning lights bathed David Chen's face in crimson as his billion-dollar empire began its death spiral, but the soft voice that would save everything belonged to a child he'd never noticed, the janitor's son, who whispered, "My daddy says you look sad. Want me to help?"
If you're ready for the full story, make sure to hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Tomorrow, I've got another jaw-dropping story lined up, packed with twists you won't want to miss.
Before the story unfolds, wherever life has led you, know this story was written with you in mind. David Chen's reflection stared back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, 43 floors above the city that never slept. At 38, he commanded chain-link technologies with the precision of a Swiss watch, his days measured in milliseconds and millions. The Armani suit hung perfectly on his lean frame, every thread in place, much like every aspect of his carefully orchestrated life. "Mr. Chen." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The board meetings moved up to 7 a.m. "The Singapore deal needs your signature." David's fingers drummed against the mahogany desk, a nervous habit he'd never quite conquered despite years of meditation apps and executive coaching. Success had a price, and his was a life lived in the margins between meetings, sustained by protein bars and the hollow victories of quarterly reports. The office felt colder tonight. Or maybe it was just him. 43 floors below, Miguel Santos pushed his cleaning cart through the lobby's marble expanse, his weathered hands steady despite the fatigue that had settled into his bones like old rain. At 45, he moved with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that honest work was its own form of prayer. His uniform was pressed, his smile genuine for the security guard who nodded his greeting. "Evening, Miguel. Little Alex with you tonight." Miguel's face brightened, the same transformation that happened every time someone mentioned his son. "See, Roberto. His babysitter got sick. I hope Mr. Chen won't mind." "That man works too hard to notice much of anything," Roberto chuckled, but there was kindness in his eyes. "Besides, Alex is probably the smartest 8-year-old in this whole building." In the break room on the 3rd floor, Alex Santos sat cross-legged on the worn couch, his small fingers dancing across a tablet that had seen better days. His dark eyes held an intensity that seemed too old for his young face, but when he smiled, which was often, he looked exactly like what he was, a child who found magic in the patterns that others couldn't see. "Papa," he called out in a voice that still carried traces of his first words, "the building's network is making weird noises again." Miguel paused in his mopping, water dripping from the strings in a steady rhythm. "Weird noises, Mijo? Not sounds. Like digital hiccups. The servers are talking to each other wrong." Alex's brow furrowed in concentration. "It's like when Abuela's radio gets all staticky before a storm." Any other parent might have dismissed this as childhood imagination, but Miguel had learned to listen. Alex saw patterns in numbers the way other children saw shapes in clouds. His teachers called it gifted. Miguel called it a blessing. Back in the executive suite, David stood at his window, watching the city's lights blur into streams of gold and white. Tomorrow would bring another day of decisions that affected thousands of jobs, millions in revenue, the delicate ecosystem of a company that bore his name but sometimes felt like a beautiful, terrible burden. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife. Emma asked why Daddy missed her recital again. "What should I tell her?" David closed his eyes. What do you tell an 11-year-old daughter when success feels more like running on a treadmill? Moving fast but getting nowhere that mattered. The building's hum seemed different tonight, though he couldn't place why. Something in the electrical current, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of another day where the cost of winning felt higher than the prize itself. 3 floors below, Alex looked up from his tablet, a small frown creasing his features. "Papa, I think something big is about to break." Have you ever noticed how children can sense things adults miss? What's the most unexpected wisdom a child has shared with you? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Asterisk. The first alarm pierced the building's silence at 11:47 p.m., followed by another, then another, until the executive floor sang with electronic panic. David's computer screen flickered once, twice, then died completely, taking with it 3 months of preparation for the Singapore merger. What the hell? He lunged for his phone, but the cell towers were overwhelmed. The building's backup generators kicked in with a mechanical groan that seemed to echo his own rising dread. Emergency lighting bathed everything in harsh white, turning his familiar office into something alien and threatening. Through his door's glass panel, he could see other offices going dark in sequence, like dominoes falling in slow motion. His hands shook as he tried to restart his workstation. Nothing. The server room. He needed to get to the server room. David ran for the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly before remembering that elevators shut down during system failures. The stairwell echoed with his footsteps, each step carrying him deeper into a nightmare he couldn't control. By the time he reached the server room on the 15th floor, sweat had soaked through his shirt despite the building's air conditioning. The room that normally hummed with quiet efficiency now screamed with warning lights and error messages scrolling across every screen. No, no, no! David's voice cracked as he watched real-time displays of their global network collapsing. Singapore, London, Tokyo, every connection severing like arteries being cut. His phone buzzed with a message that made his blood freeze. Asterisk board meeting moved to 6 a.m. Fix this or we're looking at bankruptcy protection by noon. Richard asterisk. Bankruptcy. The word hit him like a physical blow. 8,000 employees. His daughter's trust fund. The investors who'd believed in his vision. Meanwhile, 3 floors up, Alex pressed his ear to the wall, listening to sounds that existed only in frequencies of data and light. The building's digital nervous system was having a seizure, and he could feel it in his bones. "Papa," he whispered, tugging at Miguel's sleeve. "It's happening now. The big break." Miguel looked up from his cleaning supplies, seeing something in his son's eyes that made him stop mid-motion. "What kind of break, Mijo?" "The whole building's getting sick. All the computers are forgetting how to talk to each other." Alex's small hands moved in the air, tracing invisible patterns. Like if everyone in the world suddenly forgot the same word at the same time. The elevator dinged. Someone had overridden the lockdown. Miguel quickly moved Alex behind the janitor's cart as footsteps echoed down the hallway, fast and desperate. David burst through the hallway door, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie askew. He looked like a man drowning in air, gasping and wild-eyed. His gaze swept past Miguel and Alex as if they were furniture, focusing only on the glowing exit sign that pointed toward another stairwell. But Alex stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was so small, so unexpected, that David actually stopped. He turned, his eyes struggling to focus on the child who'd materialized from behind a cleaning cart like something from a dream. "My daddy says you look sad," Alex continued, his voice steady despite the way the emergency lights cast shadows across his young face. "Want me to help?" David stared. In this moment of complete corporate collapse, with his empire crumbling and his future evaporating, a child, a janitor's child, was offering to help. "Kid, David's voice failed him. The words he'd perfected for board meetings and investor calls seemed meaningless here, in this fluorescent-lit hallway, facing eyes that held no judgment, no agenda, just simple human concern. Miguel stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen." "Alex, come here. Mr. Chen is very busy." "No." The word came out sharper than David intended. He looked at Alex, really looked at him, and saw something that made his chest tighten. When was the last time someone had asked if he needed help without wanting something in return? "What's your name?" David asked, his voice gentler now. "Alex Santos." "This is my papa, Miguel." Alex pointed to his father with obvious pride. "He keeps your building clean, and I help him sometimes." "Alex," David knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "Do you know anything about computers?" Alex's eyes lit up like stars. "See, I know lots about computers. They're like people, except they talk in numbers instead of words." Despite everything, the failing systems, the looming bankruptcy, the weight of 8,000 jobs hanging in the balance, David found himself almost smiling. Like people. They get confused sometimes. And scared. And when they're scared, they forget how to be friends with other computers. Alex tilted his head, studying David's face with the intensity of someone much older. "Are you scared too?" The question hit David like a punch to the chest. Here, in the emergency lighting of a corporate hallway, with his world collapsing around him, an 8-year-old had seen through every layer of his carefully constructed armor. "Yeah," David whispered, the admission surprising him. "I'm very scared." Alex nodded solemnly, then brightened. "That's okay. Being scared just means you care about something important. Want to show me the sick computers? Maybe we can help them remember how to be friends again." Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Have you ever received assistance from someone you never expected? What happened when you let your guard down and accepted help? Share your experience below. Courage often comes in the smallest packages. David's rational mind kicked in like a circuit breaker, snapping him back to reality. He stood abruptly, the moment of vulnerability evaporating as quickly as it had come. "I appreciate the offer, but this is a multi-million-dollar crisis. I need real IT professionals, not—" He caught himself before the words "not a child" could escape, but the damage was already done. Alex's bright expression dimmed slightly. Miguel's jaw tightened. "Of course, Mr. Chen." "Alex. Vamonos. We need to finish the 3rd floor." "But Papa." "Now, Mijo." David watched them retreat, Miguel's dignified posture somehow making him feel smaller than he had moments before. The hallway felt colder without Alex's presence, the emergency lighting harsher. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. His IT director, James, answered on the first ring. "David, thank God. I'm 20 minutes out, but from what I can see remotely, we're looking at a cascading system failure. Every failsafe we built has somehow been compromised simultaneously." "How is that even possible?" "It's not naturally. This looks almost like—" James paused. "Like the system is attacking itself from the inside." David's grip tightened on the phone. "Just get here. Whatever it takes." But as he ended the call, Alex's words echoed in his mind. They get scared. And when they're scared, they forget how to be friends with other computers. No. He was being ridiculous. 8-year-olds didn't understand enterprise-level network architecture. They didn't comprehend the intricacies of... His phone buzzed again. Another board member. CNN's picking up the story. "Stock futures are already dropping. Fix this or we're calling an emergency vote." David's chest constricted. A vote meant they'd replace him. Everything he'd built, everything he'd sacrificed, his marriage, his relationship with Emma, countless nights and weekends, all of it would be gone by morning. Down the hall, Miguel's cart squeaked as he pushed it mechanically from office to office. But his movements were different now. Tighter, controlled. Alex walked beside him in unusual silence. "Papa, are you mad at me?" Miguel stopped, kneeling beside his son. "No, Mijo. Never at you. Then why do you look sad? How could he explain to an 8-year-old the weight of unspoken hierarchies? The invisible lines that separated people like them from people like David Chen? Miguel had spent years teaching Alex that kindness and intelligence mattered more than money or titles, but moments like this reminded him how naive that sounded in the real world. Some people, they think they have to fix everything themselves, Miguel said carefully. It doesn't mean they're bad people. Just scared people who forgot how to accept help. Alex considered this, his young mind working through concepts that shouldn't have made sense to someone his age. Like when I wouldn't let you help me with my math homework because I wanted to prove I was smart enough? Exactly like that. But I was being dumb, because you helping me doesn't make me less smart. It makes the math get fixed faster. Miguel smiled despite his frustration. See, exactly. Meanwhile, David paced the server room like a caged animal. The error messages continued cascading across every screen, each one representing thousands of dollars in lost revenue, hundreds of jobs potentially at stake. The air conditioning had failed along with everything else, and sweat dripped down his back despite the building's natural chill. James arrived with 2 other technicians, their faces grim as they surveyed the digital carnage. "It's worse than I thought," James muttered, fingers flying across a keyboard. The main server's AI protocols are conflicting with the backup systems. It's like they're having an argument in machine code. Can you fix it? Maybe. But David, James looked up, his face pale in the blue glow of error screens. This could take hours. Maybe days. And there's no guarantee we can recover everything. Days. David's vision blurred. He didn't have days. He barely had hours. There has to be something. Mr. Chen. David spun around. Alex stood in the doorway, his small silhouette framed by the hallway's emergency lighting. He held his worn tablet in one hand and something else, a juice box, in the other. "I brought you something to drink," Alex said simply. "Papa says you haven't eaten anything tonight." Behind him, Miguel appeared, his face apologetic but determined. "I told him to stay away, but—" "I can hear them fighting," Alex interrupted, stepping into the server room with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "The computers. They're really scared." James looked from David to the child, confusion clear on his face. "Who's this?" David's first instinct was to have them escorted out. This was his crisis, his company, his responsibility. He'd built Chainlink from nothing through sheer will and 60-hour workweeks. He didn't need. "They're arguing about who's supposed to remember what," Alex continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension. He approached one of the main terminals, his dark eyes reflecting the scrolling error codes. "See. This one thinks it's supposed to be the boss, but that one thinks it's supposed to be the boss, so they're both trying to give orders at the same time." James blinked. "That's actually not a terrible description of what's happening." "Alex," David said carefully, "this is very complicated adult work. So is my math homework sometimes, but I still know 2 + 2 = 4. Alex looked at him with those impossibly earnest eyes. Just because something's hard doesn't mean the answer has to be hard too. The simple truth of it hit David like a slap. Here he was, overthinking every solution, while a child saw the essential problem with crystalline clarity. But accepting help from an 8-year-old? What would the board think? What would James think? What would? His phone buzzed. Another message. * trading suspended. Emergency shareholders meeting in 4 hours. Prepare your resignation. * 4 hours. David looked at Alex, who was still holding out the juice box like an offering of peace. The child's faith felt both humbling and terrifying. "Alex," David said slowly, "what do you think we should tell the computers to make them stop fighting?" The building's main power grid failed at 1:23 a.m. with a sound like thunder rolling through steel bones. Emergency power kicked in, but it was limited, enough for basic lighting and life support, but not enough to run the elevators or maintain full HVAC. They were effectively trapped on the 15th floor until morning, when emergency crews could restore full power. "Well," James said, his laptop's battery indicator flashing red, "we're committed now. Whatever we're going to do, we're doing it with what we have." David looked around the server room, at James and his team hunched over failing equipment, at Miguel quietly organizing cleaning supplies into makeshift seating, at Alex who seemed completely unperturbed by their circumstances. The boy had claimed a corner near the main terminal, his tablet connected to the system through a maze of cables that James had helped him rig. "This is insane," David muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I'm betting my company on an 8-year-old. "You're not betting on me," Alex said without looking up from his screen. "You're betting on us. That's different." The simplicity of the correction hit David unexpectedly. Us. When was the last time he'd been part of an us that wasn't a boardroom strategy session? Miguel approached with 2 cups of coffee from the break room's emergency supplies. "Mr. Chen, you should eat something." He held out a sandwich wrapped in paper towels, simple ham and cheese that probably came from the employee cafeteria. "I don't usually eat food that costs less than $50? Miguel's smile took the sting out of the words. "Tonight's not usual." David accepted the sandwich, surprised by how hungry he actually was. When had he last eaten? Yesterday morning? The day before? Success had trained him to ignore his body's basic needs, treating them as weaknesses to be managed rather than requirements to be met. "Tell me about Alex," David said, settling onto an overturned crate that Miguel had positioned nearby. The informal seating felt strange, but the building's crisis had stripped away normal hierarchies. Miguel's face transformed the way it always did when discussing his son. His mother died when he was 3. Cancer. Alex doesn't remember much, but he started reading that same year. Not baby books, everything. Technical manuals, newspapers, anything with words. Self-taught. Mostly. Teachers try to help, but Miguel shrugged. He sees patterns they don't see, connections they don't make. Sometimes I think he understands the world better than adults do because he hasn't learned what's supposed to be impossible yet. David watched Alex work, his small fingers moving across interfaces with the confidence of someone 3 times his age. The boy was humming something under his breath, a melody David didn't recognize but that somehow made the sterile server room feel warmer. What's he humming? Song his mama used to sing. Cielito lindo. Little beautiful sky. Miguel's voice carried the weight of old grief, but also deep love. He hums it when he's solving hard problems. Says it helps him think. James looked up from his workstation, frustration evident in every line of his body. "David, I've tried everything I know. The corruption is deeper than I thought. We're looking at a complete system rebuild." "How long?" "Weeks. Maybe months." David's heart sank. The board meeting was in less than 3 hours. "Mr. James." Alex's voice cut through the despair. "Can you show me the error logs from exactly midnight?" James frowned but pulled up the requested data. "Here, but I don't see what." "There." Alex pointed at a timestamp that looked identical to dozens of others. "See how this error happened exactly at midnight? That's not when the system broke. That's when it got confused about what day it is." "What do you mean?" Alex looked between the adults, his expression serious. "It's like when Abuela forgets what year it is sometimes. She's not sick, just confused about when she is. The computer got confused too. It thinks it's supposed to be running last year's protocols, but the calendar says it's this year." James stared at the screen, then began typing rapidly. That's actually possible. If the system clock corrupted during the automatic update cycle, it would create cascading conflicts across every connected network, David finished, understanding dawning. The whole system is trying to exist in two different time periods simultaneously. Exactly. Alex beamed. So we don't need to rebuild everything. We just need to help it remember what time it is. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. A temporary manual override of the system clock, followed by a careful restart sequence that would allow each network component to resynchronize. It should have taken James hours to identify. Alex had spotted it in minutes. As they worked together, James handling the technical implementation, David coordinating with backup systems, Miguel keeping everyone fed and caffeinated, and Alex troubleshooting unexpected complications. Something shifted in the sterile room. "Alex," David said during a brief break, "why did you want to help me? You don't even know me." Alex looked up from his tablet, considering the question with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Papa says everyone needs help sometimes. And you looked like you were carrying something too heavy." "I was carrying something too heavy?" "See. Like when I try to carry all my books at once instead of asking Papa to help. You were trying to carry your whole building by yourself." Alex tilted his head. "But buildings are really heavy. Even for grown-ups." David felt something crack open in his chest. A tightness he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it wasn't normal. "I'm not very good at asking for help." "That's okay. I'm not very good at it either. But Papa says we don't have to be good at everything right away. We just have to try." Miguel caught David's eye across the room, and in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding that transcended the usual boundaries of employer and employee, executive and janitor. They were just two fathers, trying to do right by the people they loved. "System clock synchronized," James announced. "Beginning restart sequence." The screens around them flickered, error messages disappearing one by one as the network remembered what time it was. It was 3:47 a.m., and slowly, carefully, Chain-Link Technologies was coming back to life. But as the technical crisis resolved, David realized something else was happening. Something harder to quantify but no less important. For the first time in years, he wasn't facing a problem alone. As the system slowly came back online, painting the server room in a healthier glow of green status lights, David felt his phone buzzing insistently. The first message made his blood run cold. *David, Richard here. I know it's late, but I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we discussed succession planning. The board has concerns about your work-life balance. Call me Work-life balance. Corporate speak for, we think you're cracking under pressure. Alex noticed his expression change. "Mr. David? You look scared again." David almost denied it, then caught himself. The boy had been nothing but honest with him. "I am scared, Alex. The people who own part of my company, they think I'm not good enough anymore." "Why would they think that?" The question hung in the air like smoke. David found himself staring at his reflection in a darkened monitor, seeing a stranger, hollow-eyed, exhausted, successful by every metric that mattered to the business world, yet somehow fundamentally failing at something he couldn't name. "Because I missed my daughter's recital last week," David said quietly. "And her soccer game the week before. And her birthday party last month." The words came out like a confession. "She's 11, and I can barely remember the last time we had a conversation that wasn't me apologizing for missing something." Miguel looked up from where he was organizing equipment cables. Something in David's tone had caught his attention. "What's her name?" Alex asked. Emma Chen." David pulled out his phone, showing Alex a photo, A beautiful girl with her father's serious eyes and her mother's warm smile, holding a violin and looking directly at the camera. She plays violin. Really well, apparently. I wouldn't know. Alex studied the photo with the intensity he brought to everything. She looks lonely. The observation hit David like a physical blow. What makes you say that? She's smiling, but her eyes aren't. Like when I smile at school, but I'm really thinking about Mama. Alex looked up at David with devastating clarity. Being busy and being sad look almost the same sometimes. Miguel's hands stilled on the cables. Alex. It's okay, Papa. I know you think about her too. Alex turned back to David. My mama died when I was little, but I remember her hands when she was sick. They looked like yours do now, like they were holding onto something too tight. David's throat constricted. I'm not sick, Alex. No, but you're holding too tight anyway. Alex set down his tablet and walked over to David. Can I tell you something my mama used to say? David nodded, not trusting his voice. She said that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Even when being present is scary. Miguel's eyes glistened as he listened to his son recite wisdom that had been passed down like a family heirloom. She was talking about her cancer treatments, Miguel said softly. She was terrified, but she made sure to be present for every day she had left. I remember the day she died, Alex continued, his young voice carrying weight that no child should bear. I was scared to say goodbye because I thought it would make her leaving real. But Papa held my hand and said that not saying goodbye wouldn't make her stay. It would just mean she left without knowing how much I loved her. David felt tears he hadn't shed in years threatening to spill over. Emma probably thinks I don't love her. No, Miguel said with quiet certainty. Children always know when they're loved. But they also know when they're not prioritized. The words landed like a surgeon's scalpel. Precise, necessary, and devastating. David thought about all the times he'd told Emma he'd make it up to her later. All the promises postponed for quarterly reviews and board meetings. I don't know how to do it differently, David admitted. The company, the pressure, the expectations. If I'm not working 18-hour days, someone else will. Someone younger, hungrier, more willing to sacrifice everything. Like you did? Miguel asked gently. Like I did. David looked around the server room, at the crisis that had consumed his entire night, at the empire he'd built that felt more like a prison. I started Chainlink because I wanted to build something that mattered. Something that would make Emma proud of her father. What would make Emma proud? Alex asked. The question was so simple, so fundamental, that David realized he didn't know the answer. When had he stopped asking what his daughter actually wanted from him? I used to know, David said slowly. When she was little, she just wanted me to read her bedtime stories. Then she wanted me to help with homework. Then she wanted me to come to her school plays. He paused. I kept saying later, and now later became never. Alex nodded solemnly. When Mama was dying, I wanted to save all my good stories for when she felt better. But Papa told me that good stories are like hugs. They work better when you share them right away. Miguel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Alex was reading to her in the hospital the day she passed. Technical manuals, because that's what he had with him. She smiled the whole time, even though she probably didn't understand a word. She understood that I loved her, Alex said with a matter-of-fact wisdom that kept surprising David. That's the only part that really mattered. David's phone buzzed again. Another message from the board. But for the first time in months, he didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, he looked at Alex, really looked at him. You're very wise for 8 years old. Papa says losing someone you love makes you grow up fast. but also that it teaches you what's actually important. Alex tilted his head. What's actually important to you, Mr. David? The question hung in the server room's humming silence. Around them, the digital empire David had built continued its resurrection, systems coming online with a mechanical precision he'd always prized. But sitting here in this sterile room, with a janitor and his son who saw through every pretense he'd ever constructed, David realized that precision without presence was just elaborate emptiness. Emma, he said finally. Emma is what's actually important. Alex smiled, the first completely unguarded smile David had seen from him all night. Then maybe you should tell her that. At 4:30 a.m., with the crisis nearly resolved and dawn still an hour away, something unexpected happened in the server room. They began to laugh. It started when Alex, exhausted from hours of concentration, accidentally typed, "please," and "thank you" into a command prompt, as if he were politely asking the computer to cooperate. The system, of course, returned an error message, but James noticed and chuckled. You know what, Alex? Maybe computers would work better if we talked to them more politely. I always say please, Alex said seriously. Papa taught me that good manners work on everyone, even machines. Even grumpy CEOs? David asked, surprising himself with a lightness in his voice. Alex considered this gravely. Especially grumpy CEOs. They're usually just tired and forgot that people care about them. The observation was so astute, so gently delivered, that David found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. The sound echoed strangely in the sterile room, but it felt like something loosening inside his chest. Miguel smiled, pulling sandwiches from the employee break room. Alex, tell Mr. David about your computer at home. It's not really a computer, Alex said, his eyes lighting up. It's like 6 old computers that people threw away, but I figured out how to make them work together. Papa helped me find the parts. In the dumpster behind the electronics store, Miguel added with pride. Every Tuesday, they throw out things that just need a little patience and creativity. David watched the interplay between father and son, the way Miguel's eyes sparkled when Alex got excited, the way Alex unconsciously leaned into his father when explaining something complex. There was an ease between them that David envied, a communication that went deeper than words. Show me, David said, settling cross-legged on the floor next to Alex's makeshift workstation. For the next hour, Alex walked David through his hybrid system, explaining how he'd networked discarded laptops, tablets, and even an old gaming console into a functioning unit that could run programs none of the individual components could handle alone. It's like a family, Alex explained, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke. Each piece is good at different things. This one is really good at remembering stuff, this one is fast at thinking, and this one is good at talking to the internet. Together, they're better than any expensive computer. That's brilliant, David said, and meant it. You took things that were considered broken and made them stronger by working together. See? Like people. Alex's smile was radiant. Papa is really good at fixing things and making people feel safe. I'm good at understanding patterns. And you're good at making big decisions and helping lots of people have jobs. The casual inclusion of David in this family metaphor made his throat tighten. I don't know if I'm very good at the helping people part. You are, Miguel said quietly. Alex told me you hired Mrs. Rodriguez's son, even though he didn't have all the qualifications for the marketing job. That was 3 years ago. David remembered, Roberto Rodriguez, fresh out of community college, more enthusiasm than experience. How did you know about that? Mrs. Rodriguez cleans the floors above us. She tells everyone how you gave her son a chance when other companies wouldn't. Miguel's voice carried deep respect. She said you told Roberto that potential mattered more than pedigree. I needed someone hungry, someone who understood what it meant to work for everything they got. Like you did? Alex asked. David paused. He rarely talked about his background, the scholarship kid who'd clawed his way through MIT while working 3 jobs. Yeah, like I did. So you do understand, Alex said with satisfaction. You just forgot for a little while. James looked up from his terminal. All systems stable. We're officially back online. He grinned. Thanks to our youngest consultant here. Alex beamed, but then his expression grew thoughtful. Mr. David? What will you tell the people who were mad at you? David pulled out his phone, seeing a string of messages from board members, investors, and the media. The crisis that had threatened to destroy everything was now just another solved problem. But he realized that the real question wasn't what he'd tell them, it was what he'd tell himself. I think I'll tell them that I learned something important tonight, David said slowly. That the best solutions often come from the most unexpected places. Like janitor's sons? Alex asked with a grin. Like people who see clearly because they haven't learned to make things complicated yet. Miguel began packing up their improvised setup, but there was something reluctant in his movements, as if he didn't want this strange, wonderful night to end. Alex, we should let Mr. David get ready for his meeting. But David wasn't ready for them to leave. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Not in a boardroom or corner office, but sitting on a server room floor, sharing sandwiches with people who'd seen him at his most vulnerable and offered help without expecting anything in return. Miguel, David said carefully, what would you think about Alex visiting the office sometimes? Maybe during school breaks? We could set up a proper workstation for him. Alex's eyes went wide. Really? Really? And Miguel? David hesitated, then pushed forward. How would you feel about a different kind of position? Something that lets you use your real skills, the way you see people, understand what they need. Maybe facilities management, or employee relations. Miguel's eyes glistened. Mr. David, I appreciate the offer, but I don't have the education. You have something better. You have wisdom. And Alex is right. Sometimes the most important qualifications can't be measured on a resume. Alex threw his arms around David's waist, a spontaneous gesture that caught him completely off guard. The hug was brief but fierce, carrying all the warmth that had been missing from David's carefully controlled world. Thank you for letting us help, Alex whispered. David found himself hugging back, this small boy who'd walked into his crisis and somehow helped him find his way home to himself. What unexpected friendship has changed your perspective on success? Sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unlikely places. Share your story below. We'd love to hear about a time someone helped you see yourself more clearly. The elevator doors opened at 6:15 a.m. with a soft ding that somehow sounded ominous in the morning quiet. Richard Blackstone stepped out, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, his charcoal suit crisp enough to suggest he'd never experienced a moment of genuine crisis in his life. Behind him followed 3 other board members, their expressions ranging from concerned to coldly calculating. David's stomach dropped as he recognized the formation. This wasn't a friendly check-in. This was an intervention. David! Richard's voice carried the tone of a disappointed father. We need to talk. David stood slowly, acutely aware of his wrinkled shirt, his disheveled hair, the way he probably smelled of stale coffee and emergency rations. Behind him, Miguel quickly began gathering cleaning supplies while Alex clutched his tablet, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The crisis is resolved, David said, straightening his tie. All systems are operational, and we haven't lost any data. Yes, we heard. Richard's eyes swept the server room, taking in the makeshift workstation, the scattered food containers, the obvious signs that David had spent the night here with janitorial staff. We also heard some interesting reports about how you resolved it. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. Meaning? Board member Patricia Williams stepped forward, her expression sharp as surgical steel. Meaning security footage shows you allowing unauthorized personnel access to sensitive systems. A child. David. You gave a child access to our network infrastructure. That child saved the company, David said, his voice rising slightly. That child, Richard interrupted, represents a massive security liability. What if he'd been recording? What if this was some elaborate industrial espionage scheme? Have you completely lost your judgment? Miguel stepped protectively closer to Alex, who had gone very quiet, his dark eyes moving between the adults with growing understanding of what was happening. Mr. Chen didn't do anything wrong, Miguel said quietly. My son was just trying to help. Patricia turned her laser focus on Miguel. And you, bringing a minor into a corporate facility during a crisis? Do you understand the liability issues? The insurance implications? Pat, please, David started, but Richard held up a hand. No. David. This is exactly the kind of erratic decision-making we've been concerned about. The all-night work sessions, the isolation, the inability to delegate appropriately. Richard's voice carried the weight of predetermined conclusions. You're clearly burning out, and it's affecting your judgment. My judgment. David felt something dangerous building in his chest. My judgment saved this company. Alex's insight identified the problem in minutes when your expensive IT consultants would have taken days. An 8-year-old. David. Listen to yourself. Alex stepped forward, his small voice cutting through the tension. Mr. Richard? I know you don't know me, but I really did help. I didn't break anything or steal anything. I just... Son, Richard said, his tone condescending in a way that made David's hands clench into fists. This is adult business. Why don't you run along with your father? The dismissal was casual, automatic, the kind of thoughtless power play that corporate executives wielded without even realizing they were doing it. But David saw Alex's face crumble slightly, saw Miguel's jaw tighten with years of accumulated slights and dismissals. Don't talk to him like that, David said, his voice low and dangerous. Excuse me. I said don't talk to him like that. Alex has more insight into systems architecture than half our senior staff. He saw patterns that our expensive consultants missed. And you're dismissing him because he's 8. Patricia exchanged glances with Richard. David, you're proving our point. This is exactly the kind of attachment that compromises professional judgment. Attachment. David's voice rose. Is that what we're calling basic human decency now? We're calling it a liability, Richard said firmly. Effective immediately, we're placing you on administrative leave pending a full psychological evaluation. Patricia will serve as interim CEO while we... No. The word hung in the air like a blade. David looked around the room, at Richard's satisfied expression, at Patricia's calculating coldness, at the other board members who couldn't even meet his eyes. Then he looked at Miguel and Alex, who had become very small and very quiet in the corner. I said no, Richard. David, you don't have a choice here. The board has voted. The board has voted based on fear and ignorance. You want to know what's compromised my judgment? It's not exhaustion or breakdown. It's spending so many years trying to impress people who think value can only come from people who look like them, talk like them, went to school like them. Miguel's hand found Alex's shoulder, pulling his son closer as the corporate storm raged around them. You're having a breakdown, Patricia said coldly. This is exactly what we were afraid of. No, David said, his voice gaining strength. I'm having a breakthrough. For the first time in years, I remember why I started this company. And it wasn't to create a playground for people who think a child's worth is determined by his father's job title. Richard's face had gone red. You're fired, David. Security will escort you out. Actually, David said, pulling out his phone, I own 43% of this company. And I'm calling an emergency shareholder meeting. Every employee gets a vote on the direction of this company, not just the board. You can't be serious. David looked at Alex, who was watching him with those impossibly earnest eyes, and felt something settle into place, a certainty he hadn't experienced in years. I've never been more serious in my life. But as security guards appeared in the doorway, David realized the cost of his stand. Miguel and Alex were backing toward the emergency exit, their faces reflecting the horrible understanding that they'd somehow become the catalyst for his professional destruction. Mr. David, Alex whispered, his voice breaking slightly, we didn't mean to get you in trouble. And in that moment, watching this brave, brilliant child blame himself for the ugliness of corporate politics, David felt something shatter inside him. Not his resolve, but his last connection to the world he'd spent his adult life trying to conquer. The boy who'd saved his company was apologizing for destroying his career. The emergency exit door closed behind Miguel and Alex with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. David stood alone in the server room, surrounded by the empire he'd built and the people who wanted to tear it down, watching through the reinforced glass as the two most genuine people he'd met in years disappeared down the stairwell. Security guards flanked the doorway, their presence making it clear that his options had narrowed to compliance or removal. Richard's satisfied expression suggested he'd been planning this moment for months. David, Patricia said, her voice carrying false sympathy, we understand you're under stress. Take the leave. Get the help you need. When you're ready to think clearly again. I am thinking clearly, David interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. Through the window, he could see the city waking up. People heading to jobs where they mattered, where their contributions were valued, where 8-year-old boys weren't dismissed as security risks for the crime of being brilliant while poor. Richard moved closer, his voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone David had once found persuasive. Think about Emma, David. Think about your daughter's future. Chainlink stock will recover from this crisis, but not if you destroy your own credibility fighting over this. He gestured dismissively toward where Alex and Miguel had been standing. Emma. David's phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. Emma's science fair is Thursday at 3 p.m. She's been working on a robotics project for months. She really hopes you can make it this time. This time. The words cut deeper than Richard's threats or Patricia's calculations. How many times had he disappointed his daughter while chasing the approval of people who saw him as nothing more than a useful asset? You have 5 minutes to decide, Richard said. Sign the leave papers, apologize for this episode, and we'll call it stress-induced poor judgment. Fight us, and we'll make sure every tech company in the valley knows you had a breakdown and endangered corporate security. David's hand shook as he looked at the papers Richard held out. His signature would buy him time, preserve his reputation, keep the board's version of events from becoming public record. It was the rational choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected everything he'd spent 15 years building. But as he reached for the pen, he heard Alex's voice in his memory. Being scared just means you care about something important. What did he care about? Really care about? His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Mr. David, this is Miguel. We are okay. Thank you for being kind to Alex. He wanted me to tell you that you are braver than you think. We will remember tonight always. The message hit him like a physical blow. Here was a man who just watched his son become collateral damage in a corporate power play, and he was offering comfort. Here was a child who'd been dismissed and humiliated, and his concern was for David's feelings. David looked up at Richard, at Patricia, at the other board members who were checking their phones and watches, already mentally moving on to their next acquisition, their next quarterly target, their next disposable executive. "You know what the real crisis was last night?" David said slowly. "It wasn't the system failure. It was that I'd become so isolated, so disconnected from actual human beings, that it took an 8-year-old to remind me what leadership actually means." "David," Richard warned, "it means seeing potential in unexpected places. It means listening to voices that don't sound like yours. It means understanding that the janitor's son might see solutions that your MBA consultants miss because he hasn't learned to make simple things complicated yet." Patricia's expression had gone from sympathetic to cold. "Sign the papers, David." David picked up the pen, and for a moment, everyone in the room relaxed. Richard actually smiled. The security guards shifted their weight, preparing to escort him out quietly. Then David set the pen down without signing. "No. David, be reasonable. I spent 15 years being reasonable. I missed bedtime stories to be reasonable. I missed birthday parties to be reasonable. I missed my daughter's recitals and soccer games and science fairs to be reasonable." David's voice grew stronger with each word. "And you know what reasonable got me? A company run by people who think a child's intelligence is a security threat." He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" Patricia demanded. "Sending an email to every Chainlink employee, calling that shareholders meeting, and telling them about Alex Santos, the 8-year-old who saved our company while the board was planning to fire the CEO for having the audacity to accept help from someone who didn't go to Harvard." Richard's face had gone purple. "You're committing professional suicide. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally coming back to life." David hit send, then looked around the room one last time. "You want to know what's really compromised my judgment? It's caring more about your approval than my daughter's respect. It's building a company that values credentials over character. It's becoming the kind of man who almost let pride destroy the best thing that happened to this place in years." He walked toward the door, past the security guards who seemed uncertain whether to stop him or not. "Where are you going?" Richard called. David paused at the threshold. "To find Miguel and Alex. To apologize." And then, he pulled out his phone, scrolling to Emma's contact. "I'm going to call my daughter and ask her about her robotics project. Because it's Thursday morning, and her science fair is this afternoon, and for once in her life, her father is going to be there." He dialed Emma's number as he walked toward the elevator, his heart pounding with a terror that had nothing to do with corporate politics and everything to do with the possibility that he might be too late, that too many missed moments had already built an unbridgeable wall between them. The phone rang once. Twice. "Daddy!" Emma's voice was sleepy, surprised, cautious. "Hi, baby," David said, his voice breaking slightly. "I know it's early, but I wanted to hear about your robot." "And Emma, I'm going to be at your science fair today. I promise." There was silence on the other end, then a small, hopeful voice. "Really? Really? Nothing is more important than being there for you." Behind him, he could hear Richard shouting something about legal consequences and shareholder liability, but the words felt distant and meaningless. David had made his choice. Act 9. Resolution. Word count. 1,085. 6 months later, David Chen stood in the lobby of Chainlink Technologies at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, but this time he wasn't alone. Emma sat cross-legged on the marble floor, her robotics kit spread around her like the components of a mechanical symphony, while Alex crouched beside her, pointing out connections between circuits with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a kindred spirit. "See how the servo motor connects to the microcontroller," Alex was saying, his voice animated. "It's like teaching the robot how to wave hello." Emma's eyes lit up with understanding. Oh, so the code is like giving it manners. Exactly. Papa always says technology works better when you treat it with respect. David smiled, watching his daughter engage with concepts that had once seemed impossibly advanced to him. The science fair had been a revelation, not just Emma's sophisticated project, but her confidence, her joy in learning, her pride when she'd spotted him in the audience exactly when he'd promised to be there. Miguel emerged from the elevator, no longer wearing a janitor's uniform but the crisp polo shirt and comfortable slacks of Chainlink's new director of workplace culture. A position David had created specifically for him after the shareholder vote that had changed everything. How did the board meeting go? Miguel asked, his expression concerned. David's grin was answer enough. Shareholders voted unanimously. The Youth Education Initiative is fully funded. Papa! Alex jumped up, leaving Emma to admire her newly connected servo motor. That means we can really build the computer lab for kids? We can really build it, David confirmed. And guess who's going to be our head of student technology development? Alex's eyes went wide. Me. You. Part-time, of course. Can't interfere with your real education. But every Saturday, you'll teach other kids how to see patterns in code, how to make broken computers work together, how to solve problems by thinking differently. Emma looked up from her robot. Can I help too? I'm pretty good with robotics now. David knelt beside his daughter, still amazed by how much had changed between them. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by real conversations, shared projects, bedtime stories that had resumed after a 5-year hiatus. I was hoping you'd ask. We need someone to teach the intersection of programming and engineering. The intersection, Emma repeated, testing the grown-up phrase. I like that. Miguel cleared his throat softly. David, are you sure about all this? The board members who resigned, they're saying things. About the company's direction, about your leadership. David's expression grew serious. The aftermath of that night hadn't been simple. Richard and Patricia had indeed resigned, along with 2 other board members, taking their traditional corporate philosophy to competitors. Stock prices had fluctuated wildly for weeks as investors tried to understand Chainlink's new direction. A technology company that valued innovation over hierarchy, potential over pedigree. Let me tell you what happened in today's meeting, David said, settling onto the floor beside the children. Remember the Singapore contract we almost lost during the system crisis? They didn't just renew, they tripled their order. Want to know why? Alex and Emma leaned in, their projects temporarily forgotten. Because news traveled about how we solved the crisis. About a company where an 8-year-old's insight was valued more than corporate politics. Singapore's CTO said they wanted to work with a company that could think outside traditional boundaries. Miguel raised an eyebrow. Because of Alex. Because of all of us. Because we proved that the best solutions come from diverse perspectives, not homogeneous boardrooms. David pulled out his tablet, showing them a news article. Forbes wants to do a cover story. The 8-year-old CTO. How one company revolutionized innovation by listening to everyone. Alex blushed furiously. I'm not a CTO. No, but you're our youngest consultant. And Emma's our robotics specialist. David looked at Miguel. And you're the reason our employee satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry. It was true. Miguel's initiatives, family-friendly policies, mentorship programs, recognition systems that valued character alongside performance, had transformed Chainlink's culture. Turnover had dropped to nearly 0. Productivity had soared. Most importantly, people actually wanted to come to work. Emma held up her robot, which had successfully waved at Alex. Daddy, Remember when you used to work all the time and never smile? The question caught David off guard. I remember. You're different now. Happier. Like you remember how to be my dad instead of just a businessman. David felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever Emma's wisdom surprised him. I am happier. Do you know why? Because you learned that being successful isn't the same as being important? David stared at his 11-year-old daughter, wondering when she'd become so wise. Where did you learn that? Emma grinned, pointing at Alex. He told me. He said his papa taught him that important people make other people feel important too. Miguel's eyes glistened. Sounds like something Carmen would have said. Carmen? David asked. My wife. Alex's mother. She used to say that the measure of a life wasn't what you accomplished, but how many other people you helped accomplish their dreams. Miguel smiled at his son. I think she would have liked what we're building here. Alex nodded seriously. She would have loved Emma's robot. And she would have been proud that you listened to the scared computers instead of just trying to make them obey. The observation was so perfectly Alex, technical and emotional in equal measure, that everyone laughed. David's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Family dinner, 7 p.m., do not reschedule. He'd added the last part himself, a promise that had become sacred. No matter what crisis emerged, no matter what board emergency or client demand arose, Thursday dinner with Emma was inviolate. Speaking of dinner, David said, standing and brushing dust from his khakis, Emma and I have a tradition to maintain. But first, he looked at Miguel and Alex. What do you say we officially christen the new computer lab space? Cut some ribbon, take some photos for the Forbes article. Alex's face lit up like sunrise. Really? Really? And Alex, I want you to flip the switch that turns on all the computers for the first time. As they walked toward the elevator, David carrying Emma's robotics kit, Miguel organizing the photos they'd taken, Alex chattering excitedly about lesson plans for kids who'd never touched a computer, David caught his reflection in the polished elevator doors. The man looking back at him was different from the one who'd stood in this same elevator 6 months ago. Less polished, maybe. Definitely less concerned with appearances. But his eyes held something that had been missing for years. Contentment. Daddy, Emma said as the elevator rose toward the newly renovated 20th floor. I'm proud of you. For what, sweetheart? For learning that the best leaders don't just make good decisions. They make space for other people to make good decisions too. David hugged his daughter closer, marveling at how a night that had started with near disaster had led to everything he'd never known he wanted. Outside the elevator windows, the city sparkled in the twilight, full of potential and possibility. And somewhere in that city, other children were dreaming of futures where their ideas would be heard, their potential recognized, their voices valued regardless of their age or background or the job their parents held. Chain-Link Technologies was about to make sure those dreams had a place to grow. What child in your life has taught you something profound about success, kindness, or seeing the world differently? Sometimes our greatest teachers come in the smallest packages. Share your story below. We believe every child has wisdom worth celebrating, and every adult has the capacity to listen and learn. The story of David, Miguel, and Alex reminds us that true leadership isn't about commanding from the top. It's about creating space for everyone's gifts to shine. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply seeing potential where others see obstacles, and remembering that wisdom comes in all ages, all backgrounds, and all forms.
Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. We have plenty of other fascinating and inspiring stories waiting for you, so just click on the image on your screen to watch the next one.